I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to everyone in Bowling Green or listening on the internet, wherever or whenever you may be. My name is Joseph D. DeMare, and I'm here without my co-host, Rebecca Wood, who is under the weather today. I'm sure you'll join us in wishing her a speedy recovery. For the next hour, we're going to be taking a good, long look at the world on our program, For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, and the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and family, and the health and happiness of the dogs and cats and parakeets and parrots and boa constrictors and turtles and lizards and goldfish and pot-bellied pigs and ferrets and tarantulas and goats and hamsters and rats and guinea pigs and rabbits and iguanas. Because whether an animal is kept as a pet or is wild or as a person who keeps pets or not, we're all running around in this giant habitat called Earth. For the next 10 minutes or so, we're going to be talking about some general ecological and sociological observations. And then we'll be talking with our guest, Deborah Lee. She's the director of the Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory in Ann Arbor, Michigan. She'll be talking with us about their research into algal blooms in the Great Lakes. Then, at the bottom of the hour, we'll hear from our patrons and sponsors, to whom we are eternally grateful. After that, it'll be some ecological news. This is a pre-recorded show, recorded on Thursday, November 2nd, so you can't call into the show live, but you can call or text 419-973-5841, or send us an email at foragreenfutureradio@gmail.com at any time, and we'll do our best to incorporate your comments into our next show. We always love to hear from you. So this past week was Halloween, and here in Northwest Ohio, it got cold. Very cold, in fact. There were intense snow flurries just before trick-or-treating that scared off all but the hardiest kids in costumes. We only had about half a dozen visitors for the whole night. Consequently, we were left to ponder a huge bowl of candy at the end of the night. No, we haven't eaten it all quite yet, though we're working on it. One of the first things that struck us about the candy was that each individual piece was wrapped up in a brightly colored plastic wrapper. All the bright reds, greens, yellows, and silvers made it look kind of like a bowl full of Christmas decorations, rather than a bowl full of candy. In fact, the amount of actual candy buried somewhere in all that wrapping has decreased proportionately. Now a typical piece of Halloween candy only weighs about 1 ounce, so more plastic and less candy. We've been reporting recently that most of that plastic is going to end up in the biosphere as microplastics. Worldwide, the use of the kind of plastic films used to wrap candy and other things has surged. It had dropped when COVID first hit, but now about 2.2 pounds of plastic films are created every year for every person on Earth. The ingredients in the candy hasn't changed too much. In fact, the ingredient list for the Snickers and Three Musketeers seemed actually to be simpler than when we were trick-or-treaters in our youth. But there is one different, prominent ingredient that stands out ecologically speaking, and that is palm oil. Palm oil is high in saturated fats, which are bad for your heart. It does not contain trans fats, so there's debate on just how bad it might be. But the big problem with palm oil, ecologically speaking, is the destruction of entire ecosystems in Asian and Pacific nations in order to create palm oil plantations. Orangutans are literally being driven to extinction because their rainforest habitat is being converted to palm oil plantations in places like Sumatra. The conversion of rainforest to palm oil plantation also changes those forests from carbon sinks to carbon emitters as the deep, rich topsoil is exposed to sunlight and air, causing all that carbon to just evaporate out into the atmosphere. Elephants, rhinos, and tigers are also having their habitats be affected and are being wiped out. There's also a problem of child labor. In places like Malaysia, Indonesia, and Sierra Leone, palm oil is harvested by children. So the 1-ounce candy bar you're dropping into the bag of your neighbor's child may actually be the result of the labor of another child half a world away. Palm oil trees produce more oil per acre than almost any other kind of plant, so the economic pressure to use palm oil is intense. Some environmental groups, like the World Wildlife Fund, say we shouldn't boycott palm oil. We should just use products that have been certified as sustainably sourced, conflict-free palm oil. But that's pretty much impossible when you're buying products like candy that doesn't tell you where the palm oil they use comes from. There's another worrisome bit of information missing from the candy label. While it does say, in big capital letters, contains bioengineered food ingredients, it doesn't tell you what those ingredients are or how they were bioengineered. Genetic modification of food stuff is a huge, complex issue. We'll be spending some time on future shows discussing it, but to simply say that there's bioengineered ingredients without any details is more than a little frustrating to anyone that actually cares about what they're eating. So, here in the US, we only feel safe eating individually plastic-wrapped little tiny bits of candy, partially because of scary stories we have heard of deranged people putting deadly or dangerous things into natural food like apples. But after sitting on our cold, snowy porch all evening, mostly watching the cars go by on a street without any trick-or-treaters coming by for us, we decided next year we'll try something different. Maybe we'll look for more ethically sourced chocolate, or maybe we'll make our own treats. You could buy little wax paper envelopes that you can fit the treats into and seal with an ingredients label. Listing your ingredients and putting your own name and address on them should be enough to reassure people that they're getting something good to eat, something that was made without child labor, and something that didn't contribute to the destruction of the rainforests half a world away. Of course, what we celebrate as Halloween is actually a descendant of the Celtic pagan festival of Samhain. That was a celebration of the harvest, a preparation for the coming winter, and a time when the spirits of the dead were supposed to walk among the living. Back then, people spent most of their time outside, working on farms. It certainly is spooky as the days get shorter, the nights get longer, and there's a chill in the air. Today, in our big climate and light-controlled houses, we aren't as in touch with the changing seasons, but you can imagine that people felt the need for huge bonfires as the light started dwindling away. As the insects die and the leaves die and fall from the trees, it's no wonder this time of year is associated with death. Ecologically speaking, death is part of the cycle of life. Those dead leaves contain carbon and nutrients that, once they're broken down by decomposers, will nourish the trees and plants of the future. 8 million tons of leaves are being sent to landfills each year in the United States. That's a lot of carbon and a lot of nutrients that could instead be enriching the soil around your house. The Wisconsin Cooperative Extension says that if your lawn is less than 25% covered in leaves, you don't actually need to do any raking at all. Over the course of the winter, the leaves will naturally dry out, blow around, and break down into your lawn. Even if up to 50% of your lawn is covered in leaves, they still say you should just run your lawnmower over the leaves, and that'll be enough for them to be broken down into smaller pieces that won't damage your lawn. Above 50%, they do suggest that if you want to save your grass, you'll have to do some raking. But even then, they suggest saving the raked up leaves for compost or raking them into a garden patch rather than shipping them off to the dump. So, along with the cold and the snow comes the annual firing up of furnaces. As we've reported many times, heat pumps are commonly considered the most environmentally friendly way to heat and cool your home. They can also reduce your annual heating bills by thousands of dollars. In the US, sales of heat pump furnaces exceeded the sales of gas furnaces for the first time in history last year. That trend is expected to continue as tax credits for up to 30% of the value of the furnaces are now available for those who switch to heat pumps. The most efficient are geothermal heat pumps, which get the energy to heat your home from the ground around your house. But air-to-air heat pumps are also good. We had actually hoped to switch to geothermal heating in our household this year, especially after a costly blower motor repair for our gas furnace, but that's become a project for next year. There are 4 main ways Americans heat their homes. Heating with gas is the biggest, with around half of U.S. households. Next comes electricity, which is popular mainly in the South, with about 40%. That includes both resistive heating, which uses electricity to heat coils like on an electric stove, and heat pumps. Oil and propane are both responsible for heating around 5% of homes, and wood comes in around 2%. Now, there is another kind of climate control for houses that is even better for the environment than heat pumps. That's what's called passive solar heating. You can design a house which uses glass to keep solar energy in and to heat large thermal masses like masonry walls, so that you don't need any kind of furnace to maintain steady temperature year-round. This technique requires that the house be designed around passive solar from the very beginning of its construction. Often, a passive solar house will be built into the side of a southern-facing hill. Usually the entire southern wall will be glass. Some of these designs use thermal masses that are stored underground in insulated chambers and heated all through the summer. They could be heated up to hundreds of degrees, and then that heat is released back into the home during the winter. Passively heated homes often have large open floor plans so that air can circulate around freely and keep temperatures even throughout the house. One more alternative to our fossil fuel burning homes is the super insulated house. It's possible to insulate homes to the point where just the heat given off by the people, pets, and appliances inside the home generate enough heat to keep everything inside warm. The chief problem with this design is that super insulated houses have to essentially be airtight. So there's a danger of CO2 levels getting too high, or condensation or mildew forming. Super insulated houses usually need to have air exchangers that keep bringing fresh air in. They also might have air filtration and dehumidifiers. Still, even with all that, they only use a tiny fraction of the energy normal houses use. Solar heating can provide quite a bit of heat in the summertime. There are houses that combine solar heating and insulation to fill almost all the household's needs. But, of course, it's not available 24/7. There's no reason we can't use it while it's there. The solar energy can heat up water or other thermal masses to be used when the sun isn't shining. One source of energy that is not practical for large-scale heating is wood. If everyone switched to wood heating, we would burn down every tree in America in just a few years. In fact, that's exactly what happened to the forests of the Adirondack Mountains in New York. The region was clear-cut for charcoal that was used to cook and heat homes in New York City. It took about 50 years to turn what had been some of the deepest forest in the world into barren rock and eroded soils. After the land had been completely denuded, the New York State Legislature stepped in and created the Adirondack Preserve. At the time, it was something of a joke, that of a forest preserve with no forest. But now that the trees have been allowed to regenerate, the land is once again deeply forested. Of course, now that there's trees again, the pressure to cut them down has also returned, but that's a story for a different time. The point is that wood heating is not an option for heating more than 1 or 2% of our homes. We're all human, we have needs, and we do need to heat and cool our homes. Some environmentalists resist wind and solar energy, saying that those forms of technology are just furthering a society which is fundamentally unsustainable, but they don't give alternatives. To simply block wind and solar without giving us another way to get away from fossil fuels and nuclear energy keeps us locked into the very unsustainable technologies that are killing the planet right now. One thing that's been killing Lake Erie is the annual algae blooms. Now, by themselves, algae blooms are a natural phenomenon, just a quirk of nature. There are algae blooms in wilderness lakes that are not being contaminated by humans, and that are part of the local ecosystems there. But the size and frequency of the blooms in Lake Erie are definitely being affected by human pollution. Specifically, the pollution running off of farms in the form of both fertilizers and sewage being released by concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOS, or CAFOs. The Maumee River that runs through Toledo picks up the most of these pollutants as it flows through agricultural areas like Wood County and then dumps them into the lake. Our next guest has spent many years studying these blooms and has amassed a great deal of knowledge about them. Let's listen now as she shares some of that knowledge with us. Hello, and welcome to For a Green Future. Can you please tell us your name and title?
Yeah, I'm Debbie Lee. I'm Director of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory. It's a long name, but we often go by the acronym of GLERL, G-L-E-R-L. And we do freshwater research primarily on the Great Lakes, looking at chemical, physical, and biological aspects of the Great Lakes.
That's great. Could we start with getting a little more background on GLERL? How long have you been around, and what's your main focus? What do you folks do there?
Well, GLERL was formed back in about 1974. In fact, our 50th anniversary is coming up in April of next year. So we're planning a lot of celebrations to highlight the work that we've done over the past 50 years. And we look at the Great Lakes from what we call a whole Earth system perspective. We don't just study one aspect. We look at how the lakes interact with the chemistry and the biology and the meteorology. And the thing that's really unique about the laboratory is we do fundamental research, but then we translate that science into models and applications for decision making on how to better manage the Great Lakes.
Right, so one of the things you do there is model ecosystem dynamics. We assume you're not just looking for photogenic sturgeon with your models. What does that model process involve on your end?
So we're looking at ecosystem dynamics is how things such as like invasive species, like the quagga mussels or the zebra mussels, impact the biology of the lake. We also look at how harmful algal blooms are starting and how they impact the lakes, how they produce their toxins and when. And then we turn those into models like our harmful algal bloom tracker, which then allows people to understand when there might be harmful algal blooms either at beaches, so they know not to go in the water, or approaching water intakes, so water managers know how to change their water processing so that they don't take in any of those toxins.
That's probably one of the more important processes you do for the local ecosystem, is the algal bloom tracking. Lately, you've been in the news about some of your more recent findings. What has your research been showing?
Well, we're learning a lot more about this really complex issue of algal blooms. We're learning that it's not only the spring runoff from agricultural fields that produce phosphorus and nitrogen that feeds the algal blooms, but there's also another aspect called legacy phosphorus, which is in the deep in the watersheds, soil, in the river sediments, in the lake sediments themselves. And so we're finding a very complex interaction between all these different aspects that are leading to these harmful algal blooms. We're also finding that nitrogen plays a role as well as phosphorus, and that adds to the complexity of the challenge of understanding this particular ecosystem dynamic.
Could you elaborate a little more on the health risks and the ecosystem risks that are associated with these large algal blooms?
Yes, so these large algal blooms can produce toxins. They're actually microcystins that are actually a liver toxin. So if they're ingested, they can cause liver damage, nervous system damage. And if you also get it on your skin, it can cause rashes and other irritation. Now, no people have died from ingesting these toxins, but pets and animals have been known to be impacted by that. So if you see that thick, bright green scum on the beach, don't go in the water. Don't let your pets go in the water. And look for signs. Usually signs are posted if there are conditions that aren't suitable for swimming or going into the water.
Definitely not something we want around, no. You've got a cool new tool for studying algal blooms. Isn't that right? Can you tell us about the shark system?
Sure. We actually have many cool tools, and they've been evolving over time as we learn more and need to do more observations on harmful algal blooms. But the SHARC, the SHARC, stands for the Sea Harmful Algal Research Craft. And what it really is it's about a 20-foot, very low-profile boat, a bright yellow, so if you see it, you won't miss it. And it can cruise autonomously in shallow waters where we can't get our boats and other observing systems. And embedded in that shark is what we call a third-generation environmental sample processor. So it's a very miniaturized laboratory in a can. It can take water samples, detect the microcystins, and then communicate back to us where they're located. And so we call it a third generation because we have the second generation, which are actually large cans, about the size, a little bit bigger than an oil drum. And they actually sit on the bottom of the lake and then can sample water. So they're stationary. We put them in key locations like near water intakes. But the shark allows us to follow the bloom or go in near shore areas. And it's actually piloted from the shore by an engineer. So there aren't people on board this shark. It's fully autonomous. And we're very excited about this new technology.
That does sound pretty cool. Past guests on our show have told us that phosphorus is the main cause of all these algae blooms, especially phosphorus from agricultural runoff, like you said. You've also said already that nitrogen is a cause. What would you say phosphorus is still the main cause of algal blooms?
Yes, it still is the main cause, but the ratio of the nitrogen to the phosphorus we're finding has something to do with triggering the generation of the toxicity. Because not all algal blooms are toxin. There are things that we're trying to understand that flips their genes on to produce the toxins. And that's why we're doing a lot of very fundamental genomic research.
It was 9 years ago that the microcystin bloom contaminated Toledo's drinking water and drew national attention to the problem of cyanobacteria blooms in the Great Lakes. Since then, there's been an enormous amount of research into the problem, and a large part of it is from your organization. Do you think we'll be able to move from research to action against the blooms soon?
Yeah, I would say we've already moved to action. There's quite a number of things we've already done. So we have produced the Harmful Algal Bloom Bulletin that comes out to let people know the potential for the blooms and the severity of the blooms. And then we also have the Harmful Algal Bloom Tracker, which is a real-time assessment of where the harmful algal blooms are and forecast their movement out to 5 to 7 days into the future. So the water managers now are aware of when there's potential for those harmful algal blooms to move near the water intakes, and they can take the appropriate actions. So we're doing that well. Through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, we have other agencies who are working with the farmers to develop best management practices to help reduce phosphorus and nitrogen runoff. So we are really already taking action. And we're also building wetlands that help capture some of that surface runoff and to keep that phosphorus from entering into the lake directly. So we do have a lot we're already doing.
Are there any specific actions you could recommend either on the agricultural level or the personal level to try to prevent these kinds of things in the future?
Well, NOAA and GLERL's focus is on the lake itself. So we do that aspect of the research. But I think that's a good question to ask somebody from the U.S. Department of Agriculture or the U.S. Geological Survey. Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. If people are interested in GLERL, where can they find more information? Could they visit your labs?
You can visit our website at www.glerl.noaa.gov. And we don't really open our laboratory up to the general public. It's just not a facility that's designed for that. So people cannot come and just stop by the lab and say hello. We will, as our celebrate our anniversary next year, we'll have special activities. So stay tuned to our webpage and our blogs to see how you might become involved or follow along with us.
We'll have to keep track of that for sure. Is there anything final you'd like to add for our listeners?
No, thank you for the time and the chance to talk about GLERL and the work that we do. Thank you very much.
Thanks again.
We hope you were able to gain some knowledge about our beloved Lake Erie in that interview. We also want to say congratulations to GLERL on its 50th anniversary. All right, now on with the show. It's time to hear from our patrons and our sponsors.
For a Green Future is also brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They also restore wildlife habitats and lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. There are several ways to get a hold of them and find out what's happening. One is to call them at 419-353-1899 897. Another is to visit their website, www.wcparks.org. The website again is www.wcparks.org. They are also available on all social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and many others. Just search for WC Parks. That's the Wood County Park District, and we're very grateful for their support.
Okay, this is where we would normally hear from Rebecca, but she is out sick this week. We hope she'll be up to doing the show next week, and we hope you'll join us in wishing her a speedy recovery. You can send her get well wishes on our Facebook pages or by email at forgreenfutureradio@gmail.com. So what we have for you instead are 2 videos from the Environmental Protection Agency. The first is a quick video about electric school buses, and really reflects the kind of initiative we want to start seeing locally. This was recorded in the Denver, Colorado School District. The voices are Jared Polis, Colorado Governor, Casey Becken, EPA Regional Administrator, Delissa Grimes, bus driver for Denver Public Schools, and Rebecca McClellan, Chair of the Colorado Board of Education. It's about 2 minutes long and has some upbeat music, so hopefully this isn't too hard to listen to.
Is that the new electric bus? Yeah.
All right, I'm ready to ride the electric bus.
Now's the time. Now's the time to start electrifying your fleet. You know, what you have with electric buses is they're lower cost over time and they cost a little more upfront. So if we can help address that a little more upfront, then the school district can get all the savings, which means they can pay teachers better and reduce their class size.
School budgets are always tight, and so the federal government coming in to pay for school buses is obviously going to help. Congress passed the bipartisan infrastructure law. That legislation included $5 billion nationwide for clean school buses. EPA is rolling that money out now.
It helps recruit bus drivers too, because it's a much more pleasant driving experience for the bus drivers.
It is a smooth riding bus. It's quiet. I mean, it handles great. The kids love it because it's quiet. The other buses, they kind of rattle, and then the engine's super loud, so they love it.
Quieter neighborhoods, healthier kids, and lower cost for school districts. It's really a win-win-win. The less that we can expose kids to diesel fumes, the healthier and more ready to learn the kids will be.
It's hard to find a young student who doesn't care about the environment, and I think this really addresses student values as well. Kids are going to be standing at the bus stop near where the tailpipe goes by, whether they're getting on the bus or off the bus. So it just makes sense to cut those emissions and make sure that we're taking care of the air quality that they're exposed to.
I love the triple bottom line. It's good for the environment, good for school district budgets, and good for kids' health.
Electric school buses just seem like a really fantastic idea. Depending on the community, we're talking required ranges of just a few dozen miles, a perfect application of all electric vehicles. And the plugged-in vehicles could be used as a virtual power plant in a fashion we've talked about before on the show, for the school or the locals. So that'd be pretty cool to see in our own districts. Now we have one more EPA video to play for you. This one goes kind of deep into a very wonky report that most people outside of the environmental movement have never heard of, and we think that's a shame. There's a notion that has wormed its way into US public policy that as long as you inform people of the danger, it's okay to allow policies and products that hurt them onto the market. The ultimate example of this, of course, is cigarettes. Once upon a time, cigarettes were actually marketed as being good for you. There were all kinds of doctors' recommendations to people to start smoking to calm their nerves or to help with weight loss. Well, once the evidence that smoking actually kills people finally became public, there was a movement to ban cigarettes altogether. Warning labels were put on tobacco products instead. The idea was that if people knew how bad they were, they wouldn't smoke. Of course, that's not what happened. Smoking has declined steadily since its high of about 42% of the population back in 1965. Now we're down to about 12%. But now, the tobacco companies can argue that because people know about the dangers, the companies themselves aren't responsible for the damage their products cause. All that was to introduce this EPA video on the annual Toxics Release Inventory. The idea of the TRI is the same as warning labels on cigarettes. Instead of simply banning chemical pollution into the environment, the idea is that if people know what the chemicals are that are being put into the environment and how those chemicals might hurt their communities, the people, the individuals, would take steps to fight pollution. As with tobacco, giving companies permission to pollute while informing the public absolves them of responsibility. Unfortunately, most people have never even heard of the TRI, so we've got here for you a quick introduction.
Welcome to our video on the Toxics Release Inventory, TRI, National Analysis, where we explore the latest trends in industrial toxic chemical management and pollution prevention in the United States. Chemicals are used to make goods that we depend on every day, like pharmaceuticals, textiles, and cars. When these goods are made, chemicals can become waste and may be released into the environment. It is your right to know about the toxic chemicals companies are using and how they are managing their chemical waste, including how much is entering the environment. Certain facilities are required to report this information to EPA's Toxics Release Inventory, or TRI. Each year, EPA publishes the TRI National Analysis, an interactive web-based report that summarizes the information reported by U.S. facilities for the previous calendar year. The National Analysis provides text, charts, graphs, and other visuals to help you learn about toxic chemical releases to the air, water, and land. The National Analysis also gives you information on other waste management practices at facilities and industry efforts to prevent pollution. The Where You Live mapping tool lets you explore the data by state, county, city, and zip code. You can also focus on metropolitan areas, watersheds, and tribal lands. Overlay demographic information to learn more about the area where facilities are releasing chemicals. TRI data help community members, company representatives, government agencies, and others decide how best to protect human health and the environment. Learn more at epa.gov/TRI National Analysis.
Okay, we hope some of you will take up the EPA's invitation to go look at their TRI report this year. It's an incredible resource that makes public so much information huge polluters don't want you to know about. Once more, that's epa.gov/TRI National Analysis. Now it's time for our ecological news. We've got a pretty cool first story for you here, something that's currently unique to Cleveland, Ohio. Wind turbines have been around for quite a long time. Actually, the first ever wind turbine intended for electricity generation was also constructed in Cleveland, Ohio by Charles Brush all the way back in 1887. It was a huge undertaking with a rotor diameter of 50 feet and weighing at least 4,000 tons of wood and iron. It successfully powered the battery reserves of Brush's mansion for about 20 years, which coincidentally is around the same lifespan as a modern wind turbine. So, when a wind turbine's life, old or new, comes to an end, there's a significant amount of machinery and spare parts and scrap metal that can be recycled. But the blades themselves are usually made of a fiberglass that can be more difficult to repurpose. That's where Canvas comes in. This is a company based in Avon, Ohio, that is taking decommissioned wind turbine blades and recreating them into benches, picnic tables, and other public space decorations. They're not just plain white either. Canvas coordinates with local artists to make their creation into functional art pieces. So far, they've put their creations across 30 public spaces in Cleveland and Avon. with more to come. And really, this is only the start. Over the next decade or so, we'll be seeing a lot of little companies like Canvas, whose purpose is to make use of what these first few generations of industrial-scale wind turbines will be leaving behind. Actually, there's a bunch of federal grant money up for grabs to support scalable wind turbine recycling projects. So if you've ever had an idea about using the blades or other bits of old turbines, there's no better time than today to get started. As for right now, we'll keep an eye out for any wind turbine benches the next time we're in Cleveland, and we'll be sure to let you know if we see any. Our next story is from Reuters.com regarding the Panama Canal and their plan to reduce booking slots due to the ongoing drought. This is an extension of the passage restrictions the Panama Canal Authority had already imposed back in September, limiting the number of daily passages to 31 from an overall maximum of 36. As of November 3rd, this number will be down to 25 and will be gradually lowered all the way down to 18 as of February 1st next year. The drought has affected the water levels of Gatun Lake, which is the rainfall-fed primary reservoir of water that facilitates the canal transportation process. Over the past month, the recorded precipitation for the area was the lowest on record since 1950. All this, of course, is causing significant delays in international shipping, leading to increases in shipping rates, which will eventually lead to even more inflation pushed onto the consumer. Before these new passage limitations, the estimated loss of revenue was $200 million over the next few months. The effects of the current mandates on the economy has yet to be seen. Especially bad, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, are the delays for liquefied gas transporter exports. So who knows what effects that will cause in the next few months. But this highlights an important piece of perspective to keep in mind, that we really are all in this together. Our world is so interconnected, each element of our daily lives relies on so many complicated moving parts that any issues in the chain worldwide can have cascading effects closer to home. And the negative effects of these large-scale climate disasters will just continue to have measurably worse effects until we've dealt with their root cause. On that urgent topic, our next story comes from thehill.com. The Earth is on track to lock in a key climate threshold in 2029, says a study published in the journal Nature Climate Change on Monday. This study suggests that the world has 6 years or less of its current carbon dioxide emissions before hitting the dreaded 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold. This would mean that the global average temperature has permanently been raised to 1.5 degrees over the pre-industrial levels of around 1900. This measure has been used for years as the threshold after which certain effects of climate change will become irreversible. In other words, it's likely to trigger the runaway portion of a positive feedback loop. For example, we talked last week about how glaciers continue to recede worldwide. We can measure the retraction in terms of feet or measures of new soil revealed, and those measures are increasing roughly linearly. But after a certain amount of global warming is reached, according to estimates about 1.7 degrees Celsius above the 1900 levels, the rate of loss will become exponential and unavoidable. The ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica especially will be doomed by the rising temperatures, which would in turn lead to an increase in sea level rise, erosion, flooding, rising temperatures, and more bad stuff. Climate scientists have warned us for a decade or more about this 1.5 degree threshold. That's actually the major reason the Paris Climate Accords were signed back in December of 2015. So this recent study confirms that the goals set by the Paris Agreement in order to severely limit emissions by 2030 is, very roughly speaking, sufficient to curtail the problem. But right now, the people, and especially the governments, just aren't taking it seriously enough. A significant minority of the United States outright denies the impact of human industry on the climate, and the previous president even removed us from the Paris Agreement. Now, I don't know which of you listeners need to hear this, but speaking as a member of a younger generation, you can't just expect us to fix everything. Our society is consigning our future generations to worse lives than we have right now, and that should never be the case. In order for our children to have a better future, we all have to consider what we can do right now. That also means pushing back strongly against those that don't believe anything should be done. Here's one way that President Biden is trying to look forward to the future. Last year, Biden signed the bipartisan CHIPS and Science Act of 2022, which was a huge $50 billion commitment to invest in a wide variety of technologies, especially what they called the industries of tomorrow. That incentive will partially manifest into the creation of 31, quote, regional innovation and technology hubs spread across the nation in an intentional effort to decentralize the existing technology sectors away from the largest cities on the east and west coasts. On October 23rd, Akron, Ohio was chosen to be part of this initiative and the site of the new Sustainable Polymers Tech Hub. This will focus on accelerating U.S. sustainable polymer manufacturing and commercialization. Polymers, of course, are an insidious and omnipresent part of our daily lives. Practically everything you use has some connection to them. So any research into replacing the most common fossil fuel-based polymers with more sustainably created or biodegradable versions would be very important for us to move away from our current climate trajectory. The state of Ohio actually has the largest concentration of plastics and rubber manufacturing industry in North America, which is one reason Akron was chosen over the other 400 applications. The University of Akron and the Akron Chamber of Commerce has already been awarded a $400,000 Sustainable Polymers Strategy Development Grant, and now they have the opportunity to compete for implementation grants of between 50 and 75 million to try to make the, quote, transformative investments, innovation, supply chain resilience, and job creation, unquote. This is a real future-focused effort by Biden, and this initiative is featuring heavily in his self-promotion. While this is the kind of thing our society needs to start focusing on, we've got to be careful not to give any one individual too much credit here. This is the kind of industry-wide shift that could never have come too early. Economists and scientists alike have asked for new solutions to current problems for a very long time. One thing's for certain, Akron will become a community to watch over the next decade or so, and is poised to become a new pillar of polymer industry. But, as with most government efforts, it's one step forward and one step back. Our next story is about COP28, the upcoming climate change conference held from November 30th to December 12th, and focusing on the worldwide efforts to save the planet from climate catastrophe. The conference has always drawn a number of criticisms, including its choice of location this year being Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. And unfortunately, as reported by Reuters.com, Biden has not yet confirmed his presence at the conference. The United States will definitely be sending a contingent of staffers and policymakers, but the presence of the president at the most important climate change of the year would grant his supposed focus on climate change an air of legitimacy. This year at COP28, dozens of countries are expected to put forth a plan to permanently phase out fossil fuels on the global scale. This is in line with the goals that Biden has proposed. Right after entering office, he announced his intention for the United States to cut economy-wide net greenhouse gas pollution by 50% before the end of 2030. Even this reduction isn't sufficient, but, it's a good start. We still don't know exactly how important the climate is to Joe Biden. His economic package has provided large grants to renewable energy and to more environmental-friendly technologies, but it's still true that the United States is not on track to meet the Paris Agreement metrics in the time indicated. His administration continues to approve fossil fuel projects even in sensitive areas like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. This could all be political posturing on his part to curry favor with younger generations who cite climate change as a top issue. Attending the conference in person and fully committing to the proposals that will be presented will go a long way in convincing environmentalists Biden truly has the world's best interests at heart. He needs to publicly announce a strong resolution to cease the use of fossil fuels, to go beyond just the numbers and the campaign trail, and prove that he has what it takes to lead the world into a better future. As always, we will remain cautiously hopeful. Well, our next story deals with the changing of the seasons, always a somber reminder of the passage of time and the promise of more changes to come. We've talked a little bit already this show about the unseen environmental effects of heating your house in the winter, but perhaps even more impactful is the salt that we dump on our roads, supposedly to make them safer to drive on. A new study released on October 31st indicates that over the past decades, the excess salt has already caused problems, especially for the water table. It's even been a factor in the poor water quality of Flint, Michigan, probably the most well-known example of terrible tap water. The author of the study, Sujay Kaushal, called the slow salination of our environment, quote, the most boring but contemporary problem that we have, unquote. Globally, about 2.5 billion acres of soil, roughly the size of the United States, has gotten measurably saltier from more natural sources such as salt lakes, but mostly from human activity. Mining, construction, agriculture and irrigation, and general industry practices are overwhelming the normal salt cycle and leaving a significant amount of salt behind. Road salt, however, accounted for 44% of the country's entire salt consumption from 2013 to 2017. This is the first study that directly deals with salination on such a scale, and it's showing some pretty alarming results. Most obviously, any increase in global salt levels would directly threaten the Earth's freshwater supply, making up only 3% of the worldwide water inventory. But the chemistry behind increased salt levels is also a source for concern. An excess of salt in the water flowing through lead or copper pipes could lead to corrosion, in turn releasing toxic elements into the water to be absorbed by humans. That is partially what happened in Flint when officials switched the water source to the road salt-tainted Flint River. So, what are the alternatives to salt on the roads? Some communities have opted for a gravel salt or a sand salt mix in an effort to increase traction rather than attempting to lower the freezing point. Another solution is to use a brine, usually of beet or pickle juice, as it performs similarly to salt while releasing less loose ions. But this does require some more research to really determine the severity of the problem. Just the threat to our dwindling fresh water supplies should be enough to spur action on the local level. Here in Ohio, we're amazingly lucky to be situated next to the Great Lakes, which total 21% of the entire world's fresh water. If that ecosystem were to be disrupted by our own human-centric desires to make driving our cars easier, it would be an irreplaceable loss to our local culture and to the world at large. So you could consider de-icing your driveway with alternatives this winter, or you could petition your local government for the same. We're all in it together. Our next story from Reuters.com brings us over to the United Kingdom and Britain in particular. The High Speed 2 project, or HS2, is a proposed high-speed railway that has been heralded as a return to infrastructure investment and a method of reducing regional economic disparities across Great Britain. Originally, HS2 was intended to use Birmingham in the middle of Britain as a connection point between London in the south and Manchester and Leeds in the north and north by northeast. But previous budget concerns and, frankly, poor management as a whole have already seen most branches of the project cut. At the start of this October, Prime Minister Sunak cancelled the last accessory stops of the project, leaving only the connection between Birmingham and London. London isn't even getting a new station as part of the current plan, instead funneling more traffic into the already overcrowded Euston Central Station. I feel pretty confident in saying that if construction hadn't already started on the connection to Birmingham, Sunak would have cancelled that too. That's despite the fact that HS2 has historically been supported by his own Conservative Party. Now, we, and especially Rebecca, have talked a lot about affordable public transportation options on the show, and we'll keep talking about them until everyone has good travel options available. The original plan had some flaws, especially in the timetable of its execution, but it would have connected most of central Britain to London with a quick and easy train ride. But it's the tendency of Conservative parties in general, and Sunak in particular, to see something that benefits a large number of people and call it too expensive. The funds were already raised, property was already purchased, and the ball was rolling on HS2. Multiple studies had already been completed, stretching back to 2012, about the economic benefits and return on investment as a result of the project's completion. In some ways, it would have been easier for Sunak not to cancel it. So, where's the money going now? There's no specific expenditures highlighted so far, but there are hundreds of other extant railway, road, and bus transport projects to choose from.
Well, that brings us to the end of our show. And also, regretfully, this is the end of my time here on For a Green Future as your guest host. My namesake, and the original host of this show, will be finished with his prior commitment as of this Tuesday, November 7th. Coincidentally, we'd like to invite all of you listening to vote on or before that date. Civil engagement is a crucial part of our democracy and should be encouraged whenever possible. It's been really fun being your host these past few months. As you might remember, I took over from Shabazz Khan after his stint as guest host. I slightly regret not being able to do a live show for you all, like how Shabazz and the original host were doing, but this is the best we were able to do under the circumstances. Now, we haven't worked out exactly what will be happening here for our very next show. We've still got to arrange some stuff behind the scenes, but it's very likely the original host will return for our next broadcast on November 11th and 12th. I might be returning in some fashion or other for however we decide to handle it. But what should always be true is that you'll be able to send us questions or comments about this show, the next show, or anything else you'd like to talk about. You can text or call us at 419-973-5841, or you can email us at foragreenfutureradio@gmail.com. What'll also be true is that he who must not be named will finally get to break their silence on exactly what's been happening and what he's been doing. So you can look forward to that and more. But for now, that'll do it for us this week. This is Joseph D. DeMare signing off.
I don't want no oil, a spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun